Okay, one more essay about the short story 11. The passage 11, we would better call it a story or a short story. 11 is about a girl, Rachel, whose birthday is ruined because of her teacher, Mrs. Price. The story revolves around an ugly red sweater that Mrs. Price wants to get rid of since it has been in the coat room for over a month. Mrs. Price was wrong to act the way she did by forcing Rachel to take and even wear the sweater, because it didn't actually belong to Rachel. Mrs. Price acted the way she did because she was annoying that it had been in the coat room for a very long time. She thought she was right simply because she was older, and she didn't want to waste class time. Okay, let's start with the good. The ending of the first paragraph is good because you clearly state three reasons, which I presume are going to be your three body paragraphs. In concise sentences, you have clear reasons, and you wrote them so that the reader knows that you will talk about these three in the following three paragraphs. However, starting the introduction would have been better if you had used a quote from the story to begin with, like the quote where Rachel describes what a lousy day she had when she said, "I wish I was 102 at the beginning of the story." You could use that as an introduction. You did summarize the story briefly, which is something good. We don't want to over-summarize the story because we need to answer the question. We don't need to actually summarize or paraphrase the story. The second thing here, you say Mrs. Price was wrong to act the way she did by forcing Rachel to take and even wear, between parentheses, the sweater. It's not okay to write something like this on your essay. So parentheses in the middle of a sentence and an exclamation mark is informal and should not be in your essay. You should write it somehow like Mrs. Price was wrong to act the way she did by not only forcing Rachel to take the sweater, but by also forcing her to wear it, something like that. Now, here you have a mistake when you say Mrs. Price acted the way she did because she was annoying. She was annoyed, you mean, okay? The sweater was annoying, but Mrs. Price was annoyed because of the sweater. Second paragraph. Mrs. Price acted the way she did because she wanted to get rid of the sweater that had been sitting in the coat room for over a month. She is so desperate that when Sylvia... Let me just stop here for a moment. Here you say because she wanted to get rid of the sweater that had been sitting. That means you are now talking in the past tense because you used had been sitting, which is a past perfect tense. However, in your introduction, you said the story revolves around an ugly sweater that Mrs. Price wants, in the present tense, to get rid of since it has been, which is the present perfect tense. So toggling between different tenses throughout your essay is not a good idea. You should stick to one tense the whole time. That had been sitting in the coat room for over a month. She is so desperate that when Sylvia, a girl in Rachel's class, again, don't use parentheses, you can say when Sylvia, comma, a girl in Rachel's class, comma, says that she thinks it's Rachel's, Mrs. Price forces Rachel to take it. Rachel says that she wishes she knew what to say to her teacher, but instead all she said was, and then you use a quote from the story, which is very important. You need to have proof from the story for each and every paragraph that you use. When Mrs. Price sees, again present tense, even though you started with the past tense, that Rachel hasn't, present tense, put the sweater on, she yells at her in front of the class. Okay, I would have wanted to see a concluding sentence right here after this, after you explain what happened, and after you explain the quote, something where you restate the reason clearly, which is your first reason, and that's that she was annoyed because of the sweater. She wanted to just get rid of the sweater. Again, your tenses, they need to be the same, either present or past. Paragraph number 3. Rachel's teacher also acted the way she did. It's preferable to say Mrs. Price right here, or Mrs. Price, Rachel's teacher, also acted the way she did, because we know her name, so referring to her as Rachel's teacher only may be a little bit confusing since you already referred to her as Mrs. Price before. Rachel's teacher also acted the way she did because she thought she was right by being older. Now, here I like the way you started your paragraph by saying also acted the way she did. This way you are explaining to the reader that this was your first reason up here, and now this is your second reason why Mrs. Price acted the way she did. She thought she was right by being older. Maybe if you use something that gives a reason, like because, it would have been better than by being older. After being forced to take the ugly red sweater, Rachel says, because she's older and the teacher, she's right and I'm not. She also forces Rachel to wear the sweater for her own satisfaction. Again, using parentheses is not preferable, since she's the teacher and she's always right. To go even further, when Phyllis Lopez says that the sweater is hers, Rachel takes it off and gives it to her right away. All the while, Mrs. Price pretends nothing has happened. Finally, third reason, Mrs. Price handled the situation the way she did because she didn't want to interrupt class time. The courtroom was becoming a nuisance, and she needed to get rid of it fast. Okay, here it would be an ambiguous pronoun. They're saying the coat room was becoming a nuisance, and she needed to get rid of it. This implies that you're talking about the coat room, but you are in fact talking about the sweater. So you should say, and she needed to get rid of that sweater or the red sweater fast. And quickly would be better than fast as an adverb. When Sylvia said it was Rachel's, that was Mrs. Price's only lead. That here is an ambiguous pronoun again. Remember, when you use this or that or similar pronouns, you need to put a word after them so that you know what you're referring to. Here you're saying that was Mrs. Price's only lead. What is that? What you mean is when Sylvia said it was Rachel's. And a pronoun can only refer to a noun, not a phrase. So you should say this or that idea, this or that problem, this or that statement, this or that sentence, something like that. Right away, she gave the sweater to Rachel and forced her to put it on, and then use another quote. Good. Mrs. Price didn't want to interrupt the class and start a distraction. Right before lunch, another girl, Phyllis Lopez, again between commas, not parentheses, realizes that it was hers, that the sweater, again, was hers, and Rachel gives the sweater to her instantly. Again, present and past tense, off and on from every paragraph to the other. You need to note that and only use one tense throughout your essay if you're talking about the same time, which is the story, which is basically one thing here. Mrs. Price pretends nothing has happened because she knows she's wrong. Paragraph 5, your conclusion. In the short story 11, the teacher, Mrs. Price, the name of the story should be underlined, not put between quotation marks. The teacher, Mrs. Price, acted the way she did because of 3 reasons. It's nice that you hear clarified that there are 3 reasons one more time. Now we know, the reader knows from the beginning and at the end that you are organized and you have 3 clear reasons. She was getting annoyed by the sweater that had been in the coat room for so long. She thought she was right because she was older, and she didn't want to waste class time. Mrs. Price had no right to handle the situation the way she did, especially since it was Rachel's birthday. At the end of the story, Rachel talks again of how her parents will be home to cut a cake and sing happy birthday to her. Only it's too late. Excellent. Your concluding sentence is very good, and the use of a quote from the end of the story at the end of your essay is also very good. So other than the notes I have here, and especially the usage of the tenses, I think this is a very good essay. Good job.